Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexstead and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. In today's episode, brought to you by Documents Core Pack by MSCRMaddons.com, Britta and I discuss importing data to Dynamics 365, Model Power Apps, and the Common Data Service. Documents Core Pack by MSCRMaddons.com is the #1 solution for professional document creation, processing, and document automation in Dynamics 365. With the document generation wizard, business processes like sending a quote as a PDF to a customer by email and saving it to SharePoint can be dialed down to a single click for your users. In addition, the powerful workflow engine allows you to fully automate the processing of documents like sending contracts or payment and shipping confirmations. Templates are based on Microsoft Word, enabling users to exploit rich features and design capabilities of MS Word while designing their templates and reports. Documents Core Pack by MSCRMaddons.com is based on the Power Platform and CDS, supporting all first-party application of Dynamics 365 customer engagement. A fully supported free trial can be started on www.mscrm-addons.com. We thank MSCRMaddons.com for their sponsorship, and now on with the show. And we're back. For real this time with another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta. How are you?
Good. How are you doing, Matt? It's a shame. We just recorded the best episode we've ever had.
I know we did.
Just kidding.
This time,
you'll get to hear it.
This time, I actually hit the record button. Fun times.
Yep. So Matt was so excited about talking about all of the awesome ways that everyday users can get data into the platform that he forgot to hit record. So we're
absolutely. And to everybody listening, they don't care because they get to hear it in this version. And now all the stuff that we were, fumbling over before.
Oh, it's perfect now.
It's just worked out. So this is really for everyone's benefit.
So let's get the scope under control first, though, because there's so many ways to get data into the platform.
Yeah, and this is one where, for Implement This, we try to focus on kind of that admin power user side of things. Mm-hmm. So, we're not going to talk about some of the ETL tools that are out there, off-the-shelf products that have built-in connectors to Dynamics. We're also not going to talk about using something like Flow or Logic apps to bring data in. While you can use them for doing that, not in scope for this discussion. Mm-hmm. We're going to focus in on like the out-of-the-box data import tools that you get through the standard user interface for Power Apps, for Common Data Service, for Dynamics 365. These are the ways that you can get data into Dynamics.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about this, and I think this was literally week 1 of my Dynamics career, was learning the import wizard. Because we were, as I've talked about before on the show, we were a tiny implementation. We did not have a developer. We had a firm no-code policy. And we were back before finance was in the cloud at all. And so there weren't connectors. There wasn't a way to go get our data. And so our data was in Excel files. Mm-hmm. And that was the way to get it into Dynamics. We could use it. And so as like a brand new baby intern, my very first week on the job, it was figuring out how to take these exports we could get from other systems or even things I'd screen scrape and import them into Dynamics. And then that grew into triggering workflows to run and all these other advanced things that we did. But the import wizard was something that I knew nothing at all. And I was able to learn that pretty quick. And now I have no idea how many thousands and thousands and thousands of imports I've done in my life. I'm a little too attached to this tool, honestly. It's so easy for me and so fast that if you've ever worked with me, I'm like the laziest person alive with creating records. If I have to create more than 5 of something, it's an import. And honestly, if I make it to 5 hand keying records, it's probably a pretty patient day in my cube, and those don't happen very often. So I love this tool.
I like Britta's rule of thumb, or I guess Britta's rule of 5 fingers. If it's more than 5,
it's so easy to import. And when you're an Excel nerd like me, I can create the data I need in Excel so fast. Or it's just an easy way to get Excel. It's very standard that out in the world, if I have data I need to bring in, it's probably already in an Excel file.
Yeah,
and it's so easy to bring in.
This is something that comes up for me in a lot of conversations where people want to know, like, what do we have for options for getting data into the platform? So I think we can start with some of the basic file types that you can use for getting things in. Mm-hmm. So what's your most common?
I use XML spreadsheet 2003.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, every time. And everyone I train to do that way. And then you get this nice little error that's like, really? 2003? Are you sure? You know when it is, right? But it works the best. Like I've tried all the different files. Like I said, I've done thousands and thousands of these imports, and XML spreadsheet 2003 has never failed me. So that's the one that I use.
Well, there you go. Well, I'm an XLSX guy these days. And I specifically like using, so you can use a variety of different formats, even just like a CSV file if you have that. So lots of options. There are also downloadable templates within Dynamics 365 that have some advantages we'll cover in a little bit here. But the basic idea is you end up getting this flat file with all of your data in it, and some of the more advanced formats for how you start with this data can save you time on the back end when you get to actually importing and mapping and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when we look at doing an actual import, there are a few places within the application that you can do this. So, one of the ones that, if you are that marketer who always wants to be able to import those leads that I seem to end up having discussions with. I mean, if you are looking at the kind of list view of leads within the classic interface, you've got an import button right there to be able to start importing data. Another option that you have is through the settings area of Dynamics 365. You can import there under the data management tab. Thank you very much. Within that, to be able to do your imports and kind of look at historic ones that you've done as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something that if you've never done this before, the templates are so easy that I usually direct people, especially if it's that marketing person or somebody else, unless I'm going to. Best case scenario actually is I use the template and then I'll skinny it down and I go and delete a bunch of fields. I've found people get really overwhelmed. If you give them just the account template, there's so many fields that they don't use and they can get really upset because it's going to include every single field, not just what's on your forms.
Oh, come on. The Yomi name and...
If you want to have a stressed out call with salespeople, sure. Otherwise, skinny it down. What do they actually need? What do you actually want from them?
So let's net it out for people. What is the advantage, or when you're providing like that template to somebody, what are some of the advantages of providing it in that format to them?
Well, if I provide it in that format, I don't have to actually data map anything. It knows that the first name is the first name. It's got it all figured out, even all of my custom fields, which is really nice. It also, if something's an option set, it's going to tell me.
And it gives you that option.
Actually gives you the correct option set, which can help
there.
So much on
validation.
import.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And if you actually have your descriptions filled out in the fields like you should, then there's just all this data there. Saves a lot of time. It kind of depends. If I'm given, especially for brand new implementations, if I'm given Excel data that's actually pretty clean and usable, because I'm so confident creating a data map, I'm just going to map it myself. But if going forward I'm handing it to someone, I'm probably going to give them some skinny down version of the template. And the nice thing is that you can just delete the columns you don't want.
Right.
So when I say skinny down, I just literally mean going through and going, nope. Ooh, that, yeah, nope, and just deleting stuff.
Yeah. And, a couple of the little gotchas along the way there is you want to make sure that you only have one and only one field with the same display name.
Yes.
As you're going there. Otherwise, it will get confused as you're trying to import that map back in. So if you have custom fields that have the same label as another out-of-the-box field or another field that you had perhaps created in a previous attempt or something like that, make sure to get rid of one of those, change the name of one of those so you don't have that conflict.
Yeah, definitely. One place that I wouldn't use the templates, or I might use them as a jumping off place, but that's not what I finish things with, is if I want to... if I have a complicated way I'm linking my data together. So if I'm just importing leads, I don't really care. I'm not trying to associate it with a lot of other things. I'm probably just importing these standalone records. But like, for example, with financial accounts, we used to bring those in working in finance. The account number was actually really important. Yeah. And there are all these account number related type fields that linked it to all the other data in the system. And so when you go to create a relationship, let's say you're looking up, you want to look up another, let's say you have account numbers on your account and some kind of contact related data, or maybe something in a custom entity needs to know what account it's related to. Whenever possible, I use the account number, or I use something that's at least alphanumeric or hopefully numbers instead of words, just because you're going to have so many fewer errors. And so that's
a little more unique. There's not a couple of potential matches it's going to try to hit.
Yeah, exactly. So the template is always going to assume the name of the record. So like if I have a lookup to account, it's going to just assume that the name of the account is what I'm looking for, and I don't necessarily want that assumption. So that's a time that I might use the template, actually convert it into an XML 2003 or copy paste and just get my headers, and then make it myself because I don't want it assuming for me and jumping ahead in the process. Sometimes that trips me up.
Yeah. And that's a really important one as you are, and it's not just with account, it's with any entity. It's going to try to look for that primary field by default.
Yeah, any lookup.
For any lookup, but you have that control when you do a data mapping not using the automatic data mapping. You can choose what is the related field or the related field based on that relationship that you're using. So if you have that account number, that's what you can use. And also for some of those fields, like the customer field is a very special one that might have an account, it might have a contact as the actual lookup there. You can define a different lookup field for each one of those relationships. It has some awareness there as you're physically building out that data mapping.
Yeah, so you can say, what field how do I want to know this is the right record instead of just being stuck with things.
Yeah.
And sometimes what I've done on more complex data is I will create a unique identifier simply for the purpose of for imports. So I'll create something that I know my import process. I know when I have my raw data coming in, I'll have those pieces together. So like I said, account numbers are awesome, but sometimes you just don't have them. So it will be some combination of the person's name. It might be a phone number. It might just something that's unique about it.
Yeah.
And then I have that on the parent record I'm trying to find on import. And then I also have that on whatever I'm importing. And that usually whenever I'm doing an import, I'm either using a unique identifier or I'm creating one. Because when you have huge loads going on, it just makes sense.
So, a couple of other things as you're going through that data mapping exercise. One of the interesting things that you have there is if there's a field that doesn't map to an existing field in Dynamics, you can choose to create that new field during the import. So literally part of the import process, it will automatically go and add in the new field for you based on the data type that you set in there. And there are some limitations around that. And, frankly, we talk a lot about it's like solution awareness and, what is your prefix for your publisher that you're having. If you're not careful, you're going to end up with new underscore at the beginning of those fields. There are ways around that, updating your default publisher and so forth. However, what is really nice about that is if you're looking at some of your, kind of getting started, whether it's a, demo to a new team internally that you're looking to loop into the Power Platform, into Dynamics, and they have an existing spreadsheet, you can kind of go from that spreadsheet, have it create all of those fields for them that are going to have the same, labeling, same names, and sense of what that originating spreadsheet was, and do that in a very rapid way.
Yeah. Which is not best practice. Please don't build your system by importing and just creating fields on the fly, because then you don't have control. And there's so many field types that you're going to want to have control over, and naming conventions and so many things. So we're not trying to tell you to skip everything you know about building fields and just import things. But it is nice. There are times that saves you some time, especially building demos.
Yeah, that internal, it's especially for that internal demo to like a new work group that's just trying to get a sense for, how could this or could this possibly work for me? It's a great thing because they probably have an existing Excel process somewhere, and there's a better way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really don't get a lot of time to build those proofs of concept. So this is the best way to do it.
And, we'll talk a little bit more about, some of the security permission stuff in a bit here. But, for creating new fields there, you would have to have either a system customizer or a system administrator.
Thank goodness, right?
Privilege to be able to create those. So if you give somebody the permission to do an import, you're not giving them carte blanche to create new fields.
Mm-hmm. Thank goodness. That's really good. Wouldn't want that. That could get messy really fast.
One of the other things that is nice during that type of import is when you're setting up that manual data map. Let's say you have an option set field and the values in your source file aren't perfectly mapped. Mm-hmm. You have the opportunity there to be able to say, hey, if it says, twigs on this side, it really, should map to the twiggy option in your option set. And you can have some of that visibility and set what those actually map to as part of your data map.
Even just the ever popular true, false versus yes, no. Mm-hmm. It might be one in the data set and it's a different one in the system. That doesn't have to be a big deal.
Sure.
It's really easy to fix. And when we're talking about data map, we just mean when you go into the import wizard, you're going to feed it your file and you're going to say what entity it's from. And then assuming you're not using a template, it's just going to pull up every column you had in your spreadsheet and say, what do you want us to do with this? And then you're going to map it to fields, whether it's creating new ones or...
Yeah, and it starts out by trying to do some mapping based on matching column titles. So if if you are setting up your own kind of source file, you can save yourself some work in that mapping interface later by just using whatever your field name is within the system ahead of time.
And it's pretty good. I mean, it'll assume first name is the same thing as first name, and it'll get pretty close, and then you have the ability there to control things.
Yeah, a couple of exceptions, like composite fields, you end up importing each of the individual fields rather than, the composite field. So full name would come in as first name and last name, and
address.
Address the same way like that. Not too surprising. It gives you that granular control. But, your experience within the platform might be, it's just this one magical conglomerated field. Mm-hmm. But that's not quite how you see it within the import wizard.
Yeah. But luckily, it all makes a lot of sense. It's first name, last name, it's, not too dicey there.
Yeah, and then the other thing, and this is especially nice if you're going to be using the same import spreadsheet again and again, you can then save that data map that you have set up and be able to use it later. So if you want to do another, the next week or the next month, you have that same format of data, you just want to bring it in, you don't have to set up the data map each time.
And that's what's made it really easy for me to hand this process off to a secretary or assistant or some kind of a special like a sales assistant or somebody else. If there's data that every quarter we have to import, I have a lot of places still where they have to bring it in every single day or every week or something like that. It takes so much of the guessing out of it. If there's a standard spreadsheet that's coming out of a related database or they're downloading from somewhere else, they just have to import it and then pick the data map and then they're done. So they don't have to know how to do all these things, which really makes it delegatable, which I really like.
Yeah. So we've gotten to the point where we have that file, we've begun the import, we've mapped the data. What happens next?
So then it's going to try to run. And the nice thing is that it is going to succeed or fail on an individual row level, which is really nice. This does mean you need to go back later and actually see what failed and then fix it, which is something that it's just really important to go back and remember to do. And it might take a couple minutes to run. It kind of depends on a couple factors there. I've never actually seen a partial fail. Have you ever seen a partial fail?
Yes, but it was not on a data set that I owned.
Oh, okay.
It was one that I was borrowing, and especially I do a lot of pre-sales work these days, right? So if 95% of the records imported, I'm not going to go chase down.
Yeah, well, especially on demo data. Yeah, I've seen obviously plenty of failures. I have never seen an actual partial fail. I would love to, if you get one, and you want to share it with me on Twitter, I'd be all about being really excited with you about that partial fail. I mean, and then, you probably want to fix it, but I just don't know what a partial fail means. Mm-hmm. Like I have, in all of the imports I've done, I've had successes or failures.
Right. So let's say, the successes, that's great. Hooray, mm-hmm. huzzah. The failures within that import that you've done, you can open up that import itself as it's kind of like its own Dynamics record, mm-hmm. where it has some associated tabs with that of like, you can see the lists of the succeeded rows, and the failed rows, and the mm-hmm. Partial, the partials,
whatever they are, yeah,
that are out there. But then with that, you can see kind of why did it fail? Mm-hmm. Where was the choke point for that? Yep. So you can go back and physically fix that by doing an export of those failed rows and then a re-import of them later.
And I don't really like that. I've always struggled with the export of the failed rows. It doesn't. It's not as clean as I want it to be. It's too much work to hack it apart and fix it. Mm-hmm. So what I usually do is right within that failure window, it'll tell me what numbers of rows failed.
Oh, okay.
And I usually run through and I'll highlight in a color, any color, what rows specifically failed, make a copy of that spreadsheet, delete everything that worked, fix whatever it is, and then re-import again.
Yeah.
That is something that is tricky here, is that if you're going back later, especially if you're an admin and you have a lot of users importing, you can't just easily go pull the file they used. Like it's mm-hmm. not stored here for you, so you can't just say, what were you trying to do? Yeah, I know it all failed, but what were you doing? You can't actually see that.
Though what I will say is there is an option if there's been an import and whether it has a bunch of failures or not, there is an option to be able to delete the records that were mm-hmm. associated with that import, whether even the ones that succeeded, as well as the import itself. So I'll use this one especially if I'm trying to kind of do a trial run of something. I'll try it. I'll be like, oh well, I must have screwed something up on this one. Half of the things didn't work. Mm-hmm. Get an idea of what didn't work. Delete that entire import and all the related records. Mm-hmm. Fix something either in my source data or in my data mapping. Then try it again rather than trying to pluck out the individual records.
Yeah, which
that
can
didn't work.
That can work, and it really depends on what you're importing. But something you have to keep in mind is that if you have workflows firing on the creation of a record, you just created a lot of records. And so those workflows are still running and they're triggering child workflows and they're doing whatever it is you've built it to do. So if you have 2,000 records you just imported and 10 of them blew up, you probably want to fix the 10 and let the mm-hmm. other workflows go on running.
Yeah.
Because just because you're deleting those records doesn't mean all of those processes aren't still running, and then it's going to get confusing because they don't exist anymore, and can be kind of tricky.
Yeah.
Something else I know we've talked about before on the show, but just to keep in mind, is that when you're creating these records via import, you are creating new records. So this is not the tool you'd use if your GUIDs really matter, like if you're going from test to production mm-hmm. and you have automation or other things tied to specific records. You're creating a new record that looks like the old one, but it's actually functionally different because it has a different GUID underneath. Mm-hmm. So just keep that in mind that these are new. And we haven't really talked about updating. It's also a great way to update records. But just know if you're creating new ones that they're not... there may be some areas in your design that are going to break. And we've talked about, we can throw that in the show notes. We've talked about that in other episodes.
Yeah, good call. So
let's talk about updating a little bit.
Okay, let's do it.
So you can use the import wizard to re-import, which is why if you dump things out in advanced find into Excel, you have those 3 hidden columns. Mm-hmm. That's why it starts on D. And if you unhide, you can see all of that, and heaven forbid you touch it, you'll just have a lot of pain and suffering. It's not going to work. But that's because it's giving all of that information to go and map things back in, which is really nice for updating. So that is a way to do it. Another way you're technically importing is if you have Excel Online and you're using that immersive Excel experience mm-hmm. right within the application.
Yeah, or it's just the link that says edit in Excel if you go from a link within Dynamics.
Yep. Then there's that button right there to import whatever changes right back in. So important that any user who has your import privilege, there's not a different import privilege. And so this is especially important in upgrade scenarios. If as far as you've thought, in theory, any salesperson could import their leads, but we know that only Jeff does. But in theory, anybody could. So we're just going to give everybody the permission because, maybe someday they'll learn. And don't think about it. And now you're upgraded and you have Excel Online. In theory, any of those users can pull up any record, any view they want, go in and change a whole bunch of data, hit save back, and make huge, fast changes to the data without realizing what they're doing. So I've always been really protective of that security permission. I'm really protective of it now. Mm-hmm. And the only way I'll give it to a user is if I teach them how to data map themselves, and I have brought them into immersive Excel. I've let them see how much damage they could do. I trust them as a person. Very judgy. But I feel like they're not going to go do massive
These
damage
are very
to my data.
special scissors. I do not want you running.
Yes, exactly. I need you to understand how fast you could burn everything to the ground because I don't have an easy undo for that. So, so it's both very cool, fast way to get data in, and that's something that I use. I'll go in and edit things fast. But you have to be careful. So watch out with your security permissions there. I do find those just get handed out really easily. I think they're in the default roles too often. Like it's just assumed that people should have it. And I'm just way overprotective, I guess. But I don't agree.
I can understand that. It's once you've been burned by it, you're very particular, very careful about it, right?
Or if you're just naturally paranoid.
So that's very cool. Another one of the things that I find particularly cool about the data import wizard is if you have multiple files that you're going to be doing an import of, you can actually bring those in one big batch inside of a zip file. So if you have 5, 6, 7 different entities, you can import all of those different entities worth of data in one big zipped up file worth of them. And there's a couple of, it's not so much different from just doing them one after another through the import wizard. But where I've really had leveraged that to good success is when you have dependencies between multiple records that you're bringing in. So as an example, I'll use account and contact as my example here. So you can imagine a world in which you have an account, and on that account there's a primary contact, which is a lookup field through a relationship. And then on the contact, you have their parent account, which is a lookup field to the account. So if you're trying to import one and then the other, you have this question where if you try to do this manually, you have a dependency between the two. You can't import one because it can't find the related field for the other. So
and it will fail.
Yeah, it'll fail.
Can't find it.
So your manual workaround is, I can chop up my data. I can do one import of my accounts without the primary contact, then import the contacts, get the right parent account on there, and then do an export and then update of my accounts to get the right associated contact. Well, that's a lot of work. And there is a better way. So if you have the kind of that codependency between those lists that you're going to be importing, and you have them both within the same zip file, the wonderful magic of the system will import them together and make those associations for you while you're going through and doing that, which if you have large lists, you're doing a big data move from another system where you have multiple relationships that way, and I run into this where, for an account, you might have several lookups to several other entities that have that kind of circular relationship to each other. So for me, that's been a very, very nice, feature in there that's not, it doesn't jump out at you right away, but once you see what you can do with it, it's very powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Gets you out of that, like what came first, the chicken or the egg scenario that you would be in otherwise. It was great.
So that's all I have. I feel like, brain dump complete.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many ways beyond this, like we didn't talk about. I mean, I think a lot of projects have something like Kingsway Soft or Scribe, or they're using a bigger tool.
Yeah, like ETL tools and that.
Yeah, absolutely a case for that. Just out of scope for the audience that we mostly have here. So keep in mind that especially if you have developers on staff or you have other things, or like you need hourly data moves or things. This is not what we're trying to get across here today.
Yeah,
we're really
exactly.
talking about what can you do yourself, especially if you have, if you are the system admin or the customizer, what are you able to do to help yourself? It just can save so much time. And then you can be impatient like me. So I think that's all I have.
Sounds good. Well, look forward to the next one.
Take care.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter too. Britta is at MacGyver CRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.